I never thought something like this would happen to me. You know, you hear about these things happening to other people, and you think, that could never be me. My wife loves me. But I learned the hard way that I was wrong. Dead wrong. It all started when I noticed the small things. The little changes. At first, they were easy to brush off. She was just busy with work, or so I thought. But when your wife starts, forgetting, to answer texts or calls, and when she's suddenly, too tired to go out for dinner, you begin to wonder. I didn't want to admit it, but a part of me knew something was off. Then, one evening, I came home early from work. I wasn't expecting anything out of the ordinary, just the usual. My wife, Julie, was in the kitchen, cooking dinner. The kids were in their rooms. But as I walked in, I noticed her phone on the counter. Face down, like she always kept it. But this time, there was something different about the way it was positioned. I don't know why, but my instincts screamed at me to check it. I picked it up, turned it over, and unlocked it. I didn't have a good reason to justify doing it, at least I didn't think I did, but I just had to. And that's when I saw it. A message from an unknown number. I miss you. Can't wait to see you tonight. Let's make it like last time. My heart sank. I felt the blood rush to my head. I thought I might pass out right then and there. I wasn't sure what to do. Do I confront her now? Do I wait for the right moment? Part of me wanted to call her out right then and there, but I knew that would only make me look desperate. I had to think. I had to gather my thoughts. So I left the phone where I found it and tried to play it cool. I told Julie dinner smelled great, that I'd grab a beer, and asked her how her day was. She seemed a bit on edge, but I didn't press. I couldn't just accuse her of something without proof. That night, after the kids were in bed, I couldn't sleep. I stayed up, waiting for the right moment to dig deeper. I knew I needed answers. So, I did what any guy would do in my situation. I started looking through her things. It wasn't something I was proud of, but I had to know. I found the phone bill under a pile of papers. I took a deep breath and flipped it open. There it was, staring back at me. A long list of calls, late-night calls. Not to friends, not to family, but to the same number. The same damn number that had been texting her earlier. It was him. The name was saved under Officer James. My heart almost stopped. I didn't want to believe it, but the pieces were falling into place. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to find out who this guy was. And when I did, I knew things would never be the same again. The next day, I got up earlier than usual. I needed to know more. I had no idea what I was walking into, but I knew I had to confront her. Julie wasn't awake yet, so I took the opportunity to follow through on my hunch. I found her work bag, pulled out her calendar, and started searching through her meetings. That's when I found it. A date marked in bold letters, dinner with Officer James. It was the same day as the late-night texts. I felt sick. I wanted to scream, to break something. But I stayed calm. I had to stay calm, because this was just the beginning. I knew I had to wait, plan, and make sure I had all the evidence. But what happened next was something I never could have anticipated. Just as I was staring at that calendar, I heard footsteps behind me. Julie was standing in the doorway. Her eyes went wide when she saw what I was looking at. "You're looking at my calendar?" she asked, her voice shaking. I turned slowly, trying to keep my composure, but inside, I was boiling over. "We need to talk," I said. Her face twisted into something almost fearful. And that's when I knew. It wasn't just about the affair anymore. It was about something bigger, something darker. I didn't know it then, but everything was about to change. Stay tuned. The rest of this story is just getting started. Julie looked at me, her face pale. She knew I had found something, but she wasn't ready to admit it. She stood there, frozen, eyes darting from the calendar back to me. "Listen," she said, her voice trembling. "I can explain." I didn't want to hear her excuses. I didn't care about the reasons. The proof was right in front of me. The calls, the texts, the dinner dates. But I couldn't let her off that easy. I had to hear it from her. Explain what, Julie? I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Tell me why you're having an affair with some cop. What do you have to explain? She took a step forward, her hands shaking as she reached for my arm, but I pulled away. Her touch felt foreign now, like it belonged to someone else. I didn't mean for it to happen, she stammered, her eyes filling with tears. It was a mistake, okay? I was lonely. You've been so distant lately. And James, he was there for me when I needed someone. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This wasn't the woman I married. The woman I married would never cheat. I'd given her everything, my heart, my time, my trust. And she betrayed it all with a cop of all people. Don't you dare blame me for this, I snapped. You made your choice. I didn't force you to do anything. This is all on you. I saw her face change then, like the tears were an act, like she was trying to manipulate me. That's when it hit me, she wasn't sorry. She was just caught. She was trying to save herself. I know you're angry, she said, wiping her tears, but I could see the defensive walls go up. But please don't do anything rash. We can work through this. We can. You've already done something rash, Julie, I interrupted. You've already crossed a line with him, with James. Don't you dare act like this is something we can fix over dinner or therapy. There was a brief silence. And then, with a deep breath, she looked me dead in the eye and said something that left me speechless. It's not just an affair, James. I'm leaving you. My heart dropped. She wasn't just admitting to the betrayal. She was ending our marriage. As if I wasn't enough, as if I hadn't done enough to keep things together. I stood there, dumbfounded, not knowing what to say. I was angry, devastated, but more than that, I felt like I was losing everything. My family. My kids. My life. The life I thought I had was slipping through my fingers. Before I could say anything, she turned away and left the room, leaving me standing there with the weight of her words crashing down on me. But that wasn't the end. No, this was just the beginning of something much darker. Something I could never have imagined. 2 days later, I got a call from the police station. It was Officer James himself. I need to talk to you, he said, his voice cold and serious. Meet me at the station. I was stunned. Why the hell was he calling me? What did he want? And why at the station? Was he trying to rub it in? I was boiling with rage, but I knew I had to go. I needed answers. I needed to know what this cop was really after. So I went. When I walked into the station, James was waiting for me in the back office. His uniform was crisp, his posture perfect. But there was something off about him. Something smug. He looked me over like I was the one who had done something wrong. Like I was the one who needed to explain myself. You're the husband, right? He asked, his tone dismissive. Yeah, I'm the husband. What the hell do you want from me? I shot back. He smirked. You know, I don't know why you're so upset. Julie and I, well, we've been having a good time. Maybe you should have paid more attention to her, instead of being so distant. The words stung. They shouldn't have, but they did. The audacity. The nerve. He was right there, in front of me, admitting it without a care in the world. But I wasn't going to let him get away with it. Not like this. What are you trying to do, huh? Rub it in? I spat, stepping forward. Why are we even talking? You've already ruined my life. His smirk faded for a moment, and he stood up straighter. You need to get something straight, he said, his voice turning serious. I'm not just here for some confession. You're in some serious trouble, buddy. I froze. What was he talking about? What trouble? Before I could respond, he dropped the bombshell. Julie filed a report against you. She says you've been threatening her. She's afraid of you. You've been violent. And now, we're going to have to take the kids from you. I felt the ground shift beneath me. This was all part of their plan. Julie and James. They had it all figured out. Frame me for something I didn't do, and take everything from me. My family. My children. And the worst part? It was working. But I wasn't going to let them get away with it. No way in hell. Stay tuned. Things are about to get even crazier. I couldn't breathe. My heart was racing in my chest, like it might explode. Julie had already betrayed me, and now, she was making sure I had nothing left to fight with. My kids. My only reason for keeping it together through all this, gone. Taken from me. Officer James was sitting there, watching my face as he delivered the gut punch. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms with a smug look on his face, as if he were already victorious. As if he'd already won. Julie's scared, man. She's got a good lawyer, and if you keep acting like this, if you keep causing problems, you might not even see your kids again. Ever. The words hit me like a ton of bricks. I was too stunned to respond. How could this happen? How had everything spiraled so far out of control? I thought I was just dealing with an affair. But now, my whole world was crashing down around me. This wasn't just about her betrayal anymore. It was about losing everything. Just think about it, James said, standing up now. He was looking down at me with that same smug expression. This could all be over if you leave her alone. If you stop causing trouble. I could barely process what he was saying. It was like everything in my mind was foggy, spinning out of control. But one thing was clear, I wasn't going to let him, or her, take my kids away without a fight. I wouldn't let them destroy me. As I walked out of that police station, my hands were shaking. I had no idea what to do next. I knew the situation was getting worse, but I couldn't let them get away with framing me like this. Something had to be done. That night I barely slept. My mind was racing, thinking of ways to get ahead of this. I wasn't going to just sit back and let Julie and James take everything from me. I had to fight back. I called an old friend of mine, Jake. He was a lawyer, not the best one, but he knew enough about family law to help me. I told him everything, even the part about James. The betrayal, the false report, everything. Jake didn't say much at first, but when I finished, he spoke in a calm, measured voice. James is a cop, right? He asked. This sounds like a setup. They're trying to paint you as the bad guy, and they've got the system on their side. I felt a chill run down my spine. He was right. This wasn't just about Julie cheating. This was a conspiracy, a way to manipulate the law in their favor. I know it's a mess, I said, my voice shaky. But I can't just let them take my kids. You're going to need a better strategy than just confronting them, Jake said. We're going to have to expose their lies piece by piece. Jake promised to help me build a case, but the truth was, I was already thinking about how I could take matters into my own hands. I knew the system wasn't on my side right now, but maybe I could turn the tables. Maybe there was another way to make them pay for what they had done. A week passed, and things got even darker. Julie and James made their moves. They filed the restraining orders, made false claims of violence, and started to alienate me from the kids. Julie didn't even let me see them. Every time I tried, she'd make an excuse. They're not ready to see you yet. They're scared. They need time. I was losing my mind. This wasn't just happening to me, it was happening to my children too. And the worst part was, they were being manipulated. Julie and James were painting me as the villain, and my kids were believing it. They weren't old enough to understand what was really going on. One afternoon, I managed to get a glimpse of them when Julie was dropping them off at her sister's place. I ran outside before she could drive away, my heart pounding. Mom! My oldest daughter, Emily, cried when she saw me. She ran to me, and for a brief moment, it felt like everything was going to be okay. But then, Julie was there, pulling her back. No! You can't see him. Not until you've talked to your counselor, Julie snapped, grabbing Emily's arm. I couldn't just stand there and watch this happen. I reached out to grab Emily, to hold her for just a few seconds, but Julie yanked her away. Stay away from my kids, you sick freak! she screamed, her face contorted with rage. It felt like a knife had been driven into my chest. I backed away slowly, not wanting to cause a scene, but inside I was seething. How could she do this? How could she turn them against me? That night I couldn't sleep. I was a mess, torn apart by everything that was happening. I knew I had to be smart. I had to plan my next move carefully. But what could I do? Julie was getting everything she wanted. And James? James was still there, still playing the role of the good guy. The cop, the protector, the one who was going to save her from the evil husband. But I wasn't going to let this stand. I had a plan. I was going to take back what was mine. Stay tuned. The next chapter is where things really start to get messy. I spent the next few days in a haze. Between the accusations, the restraining orders, and the increasing distance between me and my children, I could feel my sanity starting to slip away. I kept telling myself that I had to stay calm, that I needed to think through this logically. But every time I saw Julie's face or heard about James and his smug attitude, I felt the anger rising up again. I knew I had to do something. I just didn't know what yet. Jake was still helping me gather evidence, but he kept warning me not to do anything reckless. "We need to build a strong case," he told me. "If you go in all guns blazing, they'll use it against you. You'll end up looking like the crazy, violent guy, and then they'll have full custody." I hated that he was right. But deep down, I knew that playing it by the book might not be enough. Julie and James had the system rigged, and I had nothing to show for myself except a stack of phone bills and a few late-night text messages. Evidence, sure, but nothing that would blow their story wide open. It wasn't long before I realized that they had been setting me up all along. I could see the pattern now. They had been careful about everything: how they framed me, how they isolated me from the kids, how they painted me as the abusive husband. It was like they had a whole playbook for taking me down. But I wasn't going to give up. I couldn't. Jake and I continued to work on building a case. We started pulling together everything we could: text messages, bank records, anything that might show Julie's intent. But I knew the truth was even more complicated than that. Julie wasn't just cheating on me with a cop. She was using him to destroy me, to take everything away. And now, I had to stop her. That's when I came up with a plan. I needed to get to James. I had to find a way to make him slip up, to expose him for who he really was. He thought he was untouchable, that his badge gave him immunity from everything. But I knew better. Every man has his weaknesses, and I was determined to find James and exploit it. Jake wasn't too keen on the idea. "Don't go after him yourself," he warned me. "This could backfire." But I didn't care. I was tired of being the victim. I was tired of feeling powerless. I needed to take control of the situation, even if it meant bending a few rules. The first step was simple. I started following James. Not all the time, just enough to get a sense of where he went, what he did. It was risky, but I knew if I could find something, anything, that might expose him, I could turn the tables. I found out that he often went to the local bar after work. It wasn't a surprise. Cops like their hangouts, their routines. I showed up there a few nights later, hoping to get close to him, hoping he'd say something that would give me leverage. I wasn't sure what I was expecting, but I knew I had to try. When I walked into the bar, I spotted him immediately. He was at the back, sitting with a few other officers, laughing, drinking. I took a deep breath and walked over to the counter, ordering a beer and trying my best not to stare at him. But I couldn't help it. I had to know what he was thinking, what he was planning. About an hour later, I saw my opportunity. James was by the restroom, alone, staring at his phone. I walked past him, making sure I didn't make eye contact. But as I brushed past, I heard him mutter something under his breath. It was so quiet that most people wouldn't have noticed, but I did. He was talking to someone. "Yeah, everything's set. The restraining order will stick. We'll have him out of the picture for good. It'll be just you and me." That was it. I froze. My heart skipped a beat. He was talking about me. About how they were going to make sure I was out of the picture. And then he said it. "We'll have the kids too. Don't worry. It'll all work out." I felt a surge of rage. They weren't just trying to ruin my life, they were trying to erase me completely. I didn't care about their little plan anymore. I had what I needed. This was the proof I'd been waiting for. I had to get out of there before James saw me, before things got ugly. I left the bar as quickly as I could, my mind racing. I had just overheard James admitting everything. He and Julie had been working together, manipulating the system, making sure I was out of the picture for good. I didn't waste any time. I called Jake as soon as I got home. "I've got him," I said, almost breathless. "I've got the evidence. James is in on it. They're planning to take the kids away from me." Jake didn't ask for details. He knew the significance. "Get it to me," he said. "We'll make sure this doesn't go unnoticed." But even as I handed over the evidence to Jake, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was in deeper than I had ever imagined. Julie and James were dangerous. They'd gone to extreme lengths to set me up, and now that I had proof, I knew they wouldn't stop. They'd fight back, and when they did, I had to be ready. But something in me had changed. The man who was once heartbroken, the man who thought he was beaten, was gone. Now, I was a man on a mission. And nothing was going to stop me from getting my kids back. The battle was far from over. Stay tuned. Things are about to get a lot messier. I thought I was in control. I had the evidence, the upper hand. Jake and I were building a case, and I could feel the pieces starting to fall into place. But just when I thought I was on the verge of exposing Julie and James, the unthinkable happened. Julie filed for full custody. I should have seen it coming. Of course she would. She was trying to lock everything down, get the kids, and make sure I had nothing left. But what happened next was more than just a custody battle. It was a trap, and I walked right into it. I got the court summons a few days after my meeting with Jake. I wasn't surprised, but I was furious. I read through it, barely able to process the words. Julie's lawyer painted me as unstable, violent, and a danger to the kids. They were using everything against me, my past frustrations, the arguments we'd had, even some of the vague claims she'd made about me, getting aggressive, during our marriage. They took the smallest things and twisted them into this big, ugly narrative. But the worst part? James was listed as a character witness. He was going to stand up in front of the court and say whatever they wanted him to. And I had no doubt that he would lie. Hell, he already had. I couldn't let that happen. I was about to face the fight of my life. The court date was set for a week later. In the meantime, I kept preparing. I met with Jake constantly, working on my defense. But it wasn't just about defending myself anymore. I needed something more, something that would expose Julie and James for who they really were. If I couldn't show the court the truth, I'd do whatever it took to make sure they couldn't lie anymore. But just as I was starting to feel like I had a handle on things, the situation took another unexpected turn. One night, I was sitting at home, going over my notes, when I got a call. It was from an unknown number. I hesitated before answering, but something told me I had to pick up. "Hello?" I said, keeping my voice steady, trying not to let the nervousness seep through. "James," a voice said on the other end. It wasn't Julie, and it wasn't someone I recognized at first. But then I realized it was one of James's fellow officers. The voice was rough, low, like he was nervous about something. "Listen," the officer continued. "I'm not supposed to be talking to you. But I've got information you need to hear. James and Julie, they've been playing a dangerous game. They're not just trying to get your kids. They've got something bigger planned." I felt the blood drain from my face. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice tightening. "They're going after your house next. Julie's going to claim that you're unfit to live there, that you're a threat to the kids and the property. They've already talked to some people in the department to help make it look like you're unstable. It's all part of their plan to get everything." My mind was reeling. The house. They were going to try to take the house from me too. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about destroying me, piece by piece. I could hear the officer on the other end of the line hesitating, like he was trying to decide whether or not to keep talking. "Who are you?" I demanded. "Why are you telling me this?" "I can't say much. But you're not the only one who's been kept in the dark," he said. "There are people who don't like what they're doing. You just need to be careful. They're planning something big, and I don't think you're going to like it when it happens." Before I could ask anything else, the line went dead. The phone call ended abruptly, leaving me staring at the screen, trying to make sense of what I just heard. What was James planning? What was Julie's role in this? And who else was involved? I knew I had to act fast. I couldn't just sit around and wait for them to pull their next move. I had to get ahead of this, but the pieces weren't fitting together as easily as they had before. Every time I thought I was close to the truth, something new came up. I immediately contacted Jake and told him about the phone call. He was as shocked as I was. "This is getting out of hand," he said. "But we can't jump to conclusions just yet. Let's figure out who this officer is and why he's helping you. There's got to be more to this." I agreed. I needed to know who this officer was and why he had decided to come forward. But finding out wouldn't be easy. James and Julie were covering their tracks too well, and now I was dealing with more than just a bitter ex-wife and her cop lover. There were bigger forces at play, and I had no idea just how deep the rabbit hole went. But I wasn't about to give up. Not now. I had come too far. The next few days were a blur of phone calls, meetings with Jake, and trying to track down any leads I could find. I had to figure out who this officer was, who he was working with, and what exactly they were planning to do next. And just when I thought I was getting closer to the truth, another unexpected event threw everything into chaos. Stay tuned. The stakes are about to get even higher. I was getting desperate. Every lead I followed seemed to lead to another dead end. The officer who had called me had given me just enough to keep me on edge, but not enough to act on. The tension was eating me alive. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't think straight. It felt like Julie and James were 2 steps ahead at all times, orchestrating my downfall from the shadows. And I was running out of time. The court date was coming up fast, and I knew it was going to be a fight for my life, my children, my home, my reputation. But even in my desperation, I knew I couldn't just charge into the courtroom and hope for the best. I had to be strategic. I had to be prepared. Then, a breakthrough came from the most unexpected source. I was sitting in Jake's office late one night, reviewing paperwork and going over the details of my case for what felt like the 100th time, when Jake suddenly got a call. He answered, listening intently for a moment before raising an eyebrow and glancing at me. "James," he said, nodding slowly. "He's got a few connections in the department, huh?" I was too tired to ask what he meant. "What's going on?" Jake paused, then set the phone down and turned to me. "I don't know how to say this, but I've got a lead. It's from someone inside the department, someone who's seen things that don't add up. And they're willing to help. They know what James and Julie are up to. They've been watching from the sidelines." My pulse quickened. "Who is it? Who's helping us?" Jake didn't give a name. Instead, he just handed me a file. The moment I saw it, I felt a chill. Inside the file was a photograph, an old police photo, one of James from a few years ago. But it wasn't just him in the picture. There was someone else. Someone I didn't recognize. But the file didn't stop there. There were notes too. Handwritten in messy script, they detailed a series of undercover operations James had been involved in. There was also mention of a secret alliance, with certain figures within the local law enforcement, a group with questionable ties to criminal activities. As I flipped through the pages, one line stood out. "James is involved in a cover-up. He's using Julie to push you out of the picture." My heart pounded in my chest. This wasn't just about custody. This was about something much bigger. Something far more dangerous. I stared at the file, my mind spinning. I needed more. I needed to know how deep this went, who else was involved, and how much of the department was in on it. This was no longer a personal battle between me and Julie. This was a full-fledged conspiracy, and I was standing in the middle of it, without even realizing how much danger I was in. I couldn't just trust Jake's mysterious informant. I had to take matters into my own hands. The next few days were a whirlwind. I started to dig deeper into James' past. The more I uncovered, the more the pieces of the puzzle started to fall into place. There were rumors of police corruption, missing evidence, cases that had mysteriously been dropped or swept under the rug. It was like James and his colleagues had been operating in the shadows, manipulating the system to cover their tracks. But what was the end game? What did they want from me? Then it hit me. They weren't just after my kids or my house. This was bigger than that. They were trying to cover up something serious, and Julie was part of it. She was in on it all. She wasn't just a victim of an affair. She was a willing participant in whatever dark scheme James and his department buddies were running. I couldn't let them get away with this. That night, I made a decision. I was going to confront James directly. I knew it was risky, but I was done being passive. I had to force his hand. I had to make him slip up. And this time, I wasn't going to let him walk away unscathed. I knew where he'd be. He had a meeting at a local diner, a place he frequently went to after his shifts. It was a quiet spot. No cameras, no witnesses. It was the perfect place to confront him. I showed up at the diner at closing time, just as the last few customers were leaving. I spotted James sitting at the far booth, his back to the door, sipping on a coffee. He didn't see me coming. I walked up to him, took a deep breath, and slid into the booth across from him. He looked up, his eyes narrowing as he recognized me. He didn't say anything at first, just stared at me with that cold, calculating look. "You've got some explaining to do, James," I said, my voice low but steady. He smirked, like he wasn't the least bit worried. "Is that so?" he replied. "What are you going to do, huh? Sue me? You think a few late-night texts are going to change anything?" I leaned forward, ignoring the tightness in my chest. "It's not just about texts anymore. It's about everything. About you, about Julie, about the department. You've been lying to everyone. You've been using her to take everything from me, my family, my kids, my life. And you think I'm just going to sit back and let you get away with it?" James didn't flinch. He just smirked. "You don't have a clue, do you? You think you've got some kind of evidence? You think that little file you've got means anything to me?" I froze. He knew. He knew about the file. Then, with a twisted grin, he dropped the bombshell. "You really think you can win this? It's already over. Julie and we've already got the court in our pocket. You're the one who's going to lose it all. And once this is all over, you'll never see your kids again." My blood ran cold. This was it. They had planned everything. It wasn't just about taking my kids. They were systematically destroying me, erasing me from existence. But there was one thing James hadn't counted on. I wasn't going to go down without a fight. Stay tuned. The final act of this nightmare is about to unfold. I was standing there, across from James, trying to hold myself together. His smug grin, his confident tone, he was trying to break me, to make me feel like I was nothing. But the truth was, in that moment, I realized something. I was no longer the guy who was going to sit back and let them destroy me. The man I was before, broken, confused, passive, was gone. I was done letting Julie and James control the narrative. "I'm not afraid of you, James," I said, my voice a little steadier than before. "You think you've got it all figured out? That you're untouchable? You're not. This is just the beginning." His smile faltered for a split second. He wasn't used to being challenged. But he quickly recovered, leaning back in the booth and taking a slow sip of his coffee. "You think you can fight me?" he said, almost laughing. "You don't know how deep this goes. You're a joke. Your little plan, your pathetic attempts to expose me? They don't mean anything. You're the one who's going to end up alone. In the end, you'll have nothing left." My blood was boiling, but I knew I had to keep calm. I couldn't let him bait me. I needed him to slip up. I needed him to show me where his weak spot was. So what now, huh? You just going to sit there and gloat while you ruin my life? I pressed, leaning forward. How long has this been going on, James? How long have you been using your badge to get what you want? For a moment, I saw something shift in his eyes, a flicker of hesitation. Just for a second. And I pounced on it. I know about the cover-up, I said, leaning in closer, lowering my voice. I know what you've been doing. You and Julie. You're not fooling anyone. And I'm going to make sure everyone knows the truth. For a second, there was silence. James' expression twisted, anger flickering beneath his calm exterior. Don't be stupid, he finally growled. You have no idea what you're messing with. I'm not just some cop, James. I'm connected. You think I won't make you disappear? You think I can't make all this go away? That's when I knew. He was scared. All the bravado, the arrogance, it was a mask. He was protecting something bigger than me. And I was getting too close. But before I could say anything else, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and his expression darkened. Without another word, he stood up, throwing a few bills on the table. He didn't look at me as he walked out of the diner. I sat there for a long moment, trying to process everything that had just happened. There was something off. James wasn't acting like he had the upper hand anymore. And if I had learned anything in the past few weeks, it was that things were never as simple as they seemed. I needed to move fast. The next day, I woke up with a plan. I couldn't trust the system, not completely. But I knew I had one last card to play. I had to take things into my own hands, the way I should have done from the start. I contacted my old lawyer, Jake. I need you to get everything ready, I said, my voice urgent. The court case is coming up, and I don't trust Julie or James. They've been lying to everyone, and they've got something planned. I need to hit them with everything I've got. Jake agreed to meet me, and that afternoon, we sat in his office, going over everything. He had managed to track down the name of the officer who had tipped me off. It turned out that he wasn't just any officer. He was part of a small but dangerous group within the department that had been involved in some shady dealings. This officer had tried to expose them before, but when things went south, he was silenced. The person who had called me wasn't just trying to help me, he was trying to destroy the same corrupt system that had made James untouchable. That night, Jake and I worked until the early hours, putting together a detailed report, building a case. We had the smoking gun, everything we needed to show the court that Julie and James were not the innocent victims they had been pretending to be. They were criminals, and they had been using their influence to manipulate the system for their own gain. But even as we worked, a dark thought kept creeping into my mind. Julie was dangerous. James was dangerous. And they were both capable of anything. I couldn't let my guard down. I had to be ready for whatever they were going to throw at me next. And that's when it happened. The next day, just before the court hearing, I got a call. It was from Jake. He sounded panicked. They've got something on you, he said, his voice trembling. It's worse than we thought. Julie's lawyer, they're pulling out a last-minute surprise. They've somehow... Before he could finish, the line went dead. I grabbed my coat and ran out the door. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew one thing. Julie and James had something planned. And this time, they weren't just coming after me, they were coming after everything. I rushed to the courthouse, my mind racing. As soon as I walked through the doors, I saw Julie and James sitting together, whispering in hushed tones. They were looking at me with cold, calculating eyes. And when I saw the smug grin on James's face, I knew this wasn't just a custody battle anymore. This was war. Stay tuned. The real shock is coming. I walked into the courtroom, trying to stay calm, but my hands were shaking. The air in the room felt thick, suffocating. I could see Julie sitting in her lawyer's corner, her eyes glancing up at me as I entered. She looked confident, even smug. Beside her, James sat like a stone wall, his jaw clenched, his eyes cold and calculating. They had their plan, and I had no idea what it was, but something told me it wasn't going to be a simple custody hearing anymore. I took my seat, trying to focus, but my mind kept racing. Where was Jake? Why hadn't he called me back? Had something happened? Just as I was about to lose it, the judge walked in, and everyone stood up. I forced myself to take a deep breath, steeling myself for whatever was about to come. Court is now in session, the judge announced, his voice stern and commanding. We're here today to address the custody dispute between James and Julie Walker and James Hartfield. Both parties have submitted evidence, and will proceed with opening statements. Mr. Hartfield, you may begin. I stood up, my palms sweaty, but I kept my voice steady. I glanced briefly at Julie and James, who were both watching me intently, and I could feel the tension building. Your Honor, I started. I'm here today to defend my right to see my children. My ex-wife, Julie, and her new partner, Officer James Walker, have conspired to turn this court against me, using lies and manipulation to paint me as a violent and unfit father. They've used their influence to build a false narrative about me, one that I intend to prove is based on nothing but deception. I looked over at Julie, who was sitting with her arms crossed, eyes narrowing. She didn't look surprised. She looked like she was waiting for me to fail. As I continued, I explained the evidence we had gathered, the phone records, the hidden messages, and the file Jake had managed to compile about James's involvement in corruption. I thought I had them cornered. But then, the surprise came. Julie's lawyer stood up and interrupted me mid-sentence, holding up a thick file. Your Honor, he said, I'd like to submit this new evidence into the court record. The judge raised an eyebrow. What evidence? The lawyer laid the file on the table and opened it, revealing several photographs, a stack of documents, and a recording device. He turned the recording on, and the sound of my own voice filled the courtroom. I froze. The recording was from one of my phone calls with Jake, where I had discussed the corruption in the police department, as well as my intention to confront James directly. I hadn't realized it, but I had been recorded. My own voice, full of rage and frustration, was now being used against me. Julie's lawyer smirked, watching my reaction. This is a recording of Mr. Hartfield discussing his plans to intimidate Officer Walker and manipulate the system for his own benefit. It shows clear intent to undermine the integrity of the court and the law. I felt my stomach drop. The room felt like it was spinning. I hadn't even known I was being recorded. Was this a trap set by James and Julie from the very beginning? Was this all part of their plan? I looked at Jake, sitting in the back of the room. He was just as stunned as I was. He had no idea about this recording. He hadn't known about this new evidence. How could this happen? It wasn't supposed to go this way. The judge, a stern man with little patience for drama, didn't even look at me as he addressed the court. Mr. Hartfield, these are serious allegations. Based on the new evidence presented, I am forced to reconsider the custody arrangements. The court will reconvene after a brief recess to evaluate the full extent of this new information. I sat down, feeling like the floor had been ripped out from under me. It was happening. They were going to take my kids. The court was turning against me, and I had no idea how to fight back. How could I expose Julie and James now? How could I prove my innocence when everything was being turned against me? The recess felt like an eternity. I didn't even hear the murmurs of the other people in the room as I sat there, paralyzed. My mind was spinning. How had they done this? How had they set me up so perfectly? When the court reconvened, the judge looked at me with a cold expression, like I was a guilty man. My heart was pounding in my chest. Mr. Hartfield, given the new evidence and the severity of the claims, I am inclined to grant the petition for full custody to Mrs. Walker. You will have supervised visitation until further notice. This court is adjourned. I couldn't believe it. My children. Gone. Just like that. Julie and James stood up, and I could see the smug satisfaction on their faces. They had won. They had orchestrated this whole thing, and they were walking away as if they had just won a prize. I stood up too, but I couldn't move. The reality of it hit me like a ton of bricks. I had just lost everything. I left the courtroom in a daze, feeling like the weight of the world was pressing down on me. I didn't even look at Julie and James as they walked out ahead of me. I could hear their voices, low and condescending, talking about their victory. But something inside me snapped. I couldn't just let this happen. I couldn't walk away. I had to do something. I had to make them pay. As I stood in the hallway, watching them leave, I knew what I had to do. I couldn't let them get away with this. Not anymore. Stay tuned. The story's about to take a dark turn. I didn't leave the courthouse right away. My legs felt like lead, my mind spinning. My kids were gone. The judge had handed them over to Julie and James without hesitation, and I had no idea how to fix this. How could I have let it go this far? I should have been more careful. I should have known better than to trust anyone in this mess. But it wasn't over. I couldn't let them walk away from this, especially not after everything they'd done to me. I called Jake, but the call went straight to voicemail. He wasn't picking up. I was alone. The feeling of betrayal and anger swelled inside me, threatening to consume me. I wasn't going to just sit back and accept it. I wasn't going to let them have the final word. I walked out of the courthouse, determined to make one final move. There was still one thing I could do. One way to fight back. I had already lost the legal battle, but I hadn't lost everything. I still had the truth. I still had the evidence I'd gathered, and I still had the knowledge of their conspiracy. The corruption. The lies. They thought they had buried me, but I knew something they didn't. James and Julie weren't untouchable. As I walked through the city, my mind raced. I didn't have a solid plan yet, but one thing was clear: they'd hurt me, and now it was time for me to hurt them back. I didn't know how far I was willing to go. I didn't even know if I'd be able to pull it off. But what I did know was this: I wasn't going to just stand idly by and let them destroy everything I had. My kids. My life. The next day, I showed up at James's house. I didn't call ahead. I didn't give him any warning. I needed him to be off guard. He didn't answer the door at first, so I waited. I could hear movement inside, footsteps, muffled voices. I knew they were there. James and Julie. Together. It was late, just past 10 p.m. when he finally answered the door. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice cold and flat, the door barely cracked open. I could see his uniform in the dim light, and I could smell the alcohol on his breath. I didn't answer him right away. Instead, I just stood there, staring at him. I had so many things I wanted to say. So many things I wanted to do to him. "I know what you're doing," I said finally. My voice was calm, almost too calm. He smirked. "You think you've got something on me? I'm untouchable, James. You're wasting your time." "I know about the cover-up," I said again, this time more forcefully. "I know everything." The smirk faded from his face. For the first time, I saw real fear in his eyes. He tried to hide it, but it was there. "You don't know anything," he said, his voice wavering. "You need to leave. Now." I didn't leave. I stepped forward, pushing the door open. He tried to stop me, but I was done playing nice. I shoved past him, forcing my way into his house. "Get out!" James yelled, but his voice wasn't as confident as it had been before. He was backing away now, looking over his shoulder like he wasn't sure how to handle me. Julie came out from the kitchen, her eyes wide with shock. She took one look at me and immediately stepped between us, holding up her hands in a defensive posture. "James, please," she said, her voice frantic. "Just let him go. This isn't helping anything." But I wasn't interested in listening to her anymore. I was done with the lies. Done with the manipulation. "You don't get to walk away from this," I said, my voice cold. "You and James think you've won. But I've got something you both should be worried about. I've got the evidence to take you both down." Julie's face paled. What are you talking about? She asked, her voice shaking. You know exactly what I'm talking about, I said, pulling out a folder from my bag. I've been working on this for months. And I've got enough to expose everything. The corruption. The manipulation. Your little scheme to steal my kids. James took a step forward now, his eyes dark with anger. You think I'm scared of your little file? You don't know what you're messing with. I didn't care about his threats anymore. I had all the power in this situation, and he knew it. You're scared, James, I said, stepping closer. And you should be. I turned to Julie, whose face was a mix of guilt and fear. You're not innocent in this. You've been part of this whole thing from the start. Using your kids as pawns in your little game. Julie's eyes welled up with tears, but I wasn't going to let her manipulate me again. Not this time. You want to take everything from me? I asked, turning to James. Fine. But you're going to pay for it. I wasn't going to tell them everything I knew. I wasn't going to lay out my entire plan just yet. But I could feel it, the power was shifting. They were scared now. I could see it in their eyes. But just as I was about to make my move, my phone rang. I glanced at the screen. It was Jake. I answered it immediately. James. Jake's voice came through the phone, but he sounded rushed. You've got to get out of there. Now. Julie's lawyer just called. They've found something big. It's worse than we thought. What do you mean? I asked, my heart sinking. They're turning it around, James. They've found another piece of evidence. Something that could completely destroy you. You need to leave. Get out of there before they... The line went dead. Before I could react, I heard the sound of sirens in the distance. My blood ran cold. They had called the cops on me. They were setting me up again. I didn't have time to think. I ran. Stay tuned. The endgame is here, and it's more twisted than I ever could have imagined. I sprinted down the street, my heart pounding in my chest. The sirens were getting closer. Julie and James had set me up again. They'd figured out I was coming for them, and now they were using the law to bury me once and for all. I couldn't afford to get caught. I couldn't let them win. Not like this. I ducked into an alley and leaned against the cold brick wall, trying to catch my breath. My mind was racing, trying to piece together what had just happened. How had they turned the tables so quickly? What new evidence did they have? Was this the end of everything? The last thing I needed was to get arrested, especially now. The cops would side with James, and I'd be done. My kids would be lost to me for good. The very idea of them growing up in that toxic environment, under their manipulation, made my blood boil. I pulled out my phone, hands trembling as I dialed Jake. No answer. I tried again. Still nothing. It hit me then. I wasn't just fighting Julie and James anymore. I was fighting a system that had been bought and paid for, a system that would stop at nothing to protect its own. They had people in the department. They had connections. And now, they had something that could end me. But then I remembered something from the file I'd been given, the file that had come from the mysterious officer inside the department. I had overlooked it before in my desperation, but now it seemed clear. There was more to this than just Julie and James. Someone else was involved. Someone who could help me. I had to find them. I made my way to the only place I knew I could find answers, Jake's office. It was risky. I didn't know if anyone was following me or if James had already tipped off the local cops. But I couldn't sit back and wait for them to come after me. I had to do something. I had to turn this all around. As I neared Jake's building, I noticed the lights were on in his office. I felt a momentary surge of relief. Maybe he could help me turn the tide. Maybe he had figured out what Julie and James were planning next. I knocked on the door, but there was no answer. I knocked again. Louder this time. My pulse quickened, a knot forming in my stomach. Something was wrong. I forced the door open and walked in. What I saw made my blood run cold. Jake was sitting at his desk, his head slumped forward, eyes closed. But it wasn't peaceful. His office chair was tipped over, and papers were scattered everywhere. And then I saw it, the blood. There was blood on the floor, pooling around Jake's body. Someone had attacked him. I rushed over to him, shaking him gently. Jake? Jake, wake up! Are you okay? But it was no use. He wasn't responding. I checked for a pulse. It was weak, barely there. He was still alive. Barely. I backed away, panic rising. This wasn't just a random attack. This was meant to silence him. I could feel it in my gut. Someone knew he was working with me, someone who didn't want the truth getting out. And then I saw it. A small note, tucked under the pile of papers on Jake's desk. It was a typed letter, with one line that hit me like a slap in the face. You've gone too far. This is the final warning. If you keep pushing, there will be no one left to save you. The letter wasn't signed, but the message was clear. Whoever had done this wasn't just after Jake, they were after me. And they would stop at nothing. I had to get out of there. I couldn't stay and risk getting caught. Jake was in no condition to help me now. It was up to me to finish what we'd started. But how could I fight back against an enemy that had this kind of power? How could I expose the truth when the very people I trusted were being silenced? I stood up, heart racing, and grabbed my things, but as I turned to leave, I heard footsteps behind me. I looked around, but no one was there. The air felt thick with tension, and I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. And then I saw it, a shadow darting across the window. Someone was out there. Someone had been watching me. I wasn't alone. I ran for the door, pushing past the pile of files on the desk and heading down the hallway. I had no idea who it was or how many people were after me, but I knew one thing: I couldn't stay here. If I was going to take down James and Julie, I needed to do it fast. I heard the door behind me crash open, and then the unmistakable sound of boots hitting the floor. I was being chased. I had to move. I burst out into the street, taking off at a sprint. But I wasn't fast enough. Two figures appeared in front of me, blocking my way. One of them was wearing a police uniform. "Going somewhere, Mr. Hartfield?" the officer said with a smirk. I froze. There was no way out. But then I realized something. I didn't need to run anymore. They were trying to box me in, trying to make me feel powerless. But I wasn't powerless. Not anymore. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the flash drive I had been carrying. It contained all the evidence I had gathered: the corruption, the manipulation, the lies. Everything that would expose James and Julie for who they really were. I held it up, letting the officer see it. "You can take me," I said, my voice shaking with a mix of fear and defiance. "But you won't stop this. I've got everything. And it's all going public. Tonight." The officer's face changed. For the first time, I saw something close to panic in his eyes. "You don't know what you're messing with," he growled, stepping toward me. I turned and ran again, heart pounding as I dodged between cars, desperate to reach the only place I could trust: the media. The one place where they couldn't control the story. Where the truth would finally come out. I wasn't going down without a fight. Not anymore. As I reached the alley that led to the news station, I felt the weight of everything pressing on me. The truth was finally in my hands. But so was everything else. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about survival. And when the door slammed shut behind me, I knew the storm was just beginning. The world would finally know the truth. And Julie and James would have to answer for everything. The end.